Hey, so what's going on, guys? I'm Chris, and this is Regular Guy Training. So we're sitting out here, and we're going to talk about a few things. This review is entirely because of comments from you guys, right? I forget exactly what video that this was in, but I was asked about the Ranger plates that are on some of my magazines from Magpul. And it sort of dawned on me, you know what, I've been using these things for years. Why not, do a quick review on them? So a little bit of background on this stuff. I fed into the Magpul craze, right? Fairly shortly after I entered the Army and stuff like that in 2008, a lot of guys started getting really enthusiastic about the whole Magpul Dynamics thing, and I bought all of those fucking DVDs, okay? And I saw a lot of the kit that was on there, and one of the things that I saw were these. And, I didn't know what they were constructed out of, but at the time I was just kind of like, that looks like it would be a little bit easier for snatching magazines out of pouches, and I'm thinking like, so it would be how I would end up pulling a lot of magazines out, and it really did pique my interest. So I decided that I was going to go ahead and pick a bunch of them up, along with a bunch of PMags, and there are a couple that I've had here ever since. One of these is on this Gen 2. Another one is, this is the last two remaining on just 6-year-old magazines that I haven't destroyed yet or wore out. The original 8 that I bought are gone for the most part, except for these two. Either they were lost or something. But I had some FDE ones, but these are essentially the last two in that first run of magazines that I picked up, as far as PMags are concerned. So let's talk about a couple of things regarding the Ranger Plate. Now, as far as the Ranger Plate and stuff is concerned, I found out over time that it wasn't really, you can grab them like this and snake it out of a pouch, especially one that's really deep and covers a mag up to about here. But most AR pouches aren't that way. They cover up the magazine to about here, unless it's a flap type pouch of some kind. What I found out was that instead of trying to grab the magazines like so, what I ended up doing was trying to grab onto the magazines like so, right? And what I noticed immediately was having just that little bit of extra stuff to grab onto helped out a lot with just essentially securely pulling a magazine out of a pouch and then inserting it so it didn't feel like this coming out of there. Now you can see in in a standard PMag or something that when you start to pull one of them out, if you start to pull it out and you don't have much to hang on to, like that pouch covers the thing to about here, so you go in to reach at it and you go to pull it out, there isn't much to hang on to. Okay, that same amount of room gets as far as the pouch is concerned, is right there. You go to reach in for it, you hook up to the sides of the floor plate and start to pull up, and there's something in the palm of your hand giving you a little bit more control. And it actually helps out quite a lot. Same thing for the beer can. The same thing goes really for like the beer can grips and stuff, mostly because, especially if it is in a small pouch, okay? It's one of those things where you start to get in there to grab it, and as you start to get in there to grab it, more often than not, you have a portion of it that's clinging to the palm of your hand rather than nothing at all. So having that little bit of extra grip surface, I guess you can say, has been beneficial in a bigger way than I can say in words, really, because it's one of those things where when I get a hand on one of these things, it's secure from the get-go. I haven't, to my recent knowledge, unless I was in a really weird position, I don't think I've bobbled a reload from one of these magazines yet, or a magazine fitted with one of these yet. Now, there's a sort of a secondary benefit to this as well, because let's go ahead and get an example of this right here. Like, for instance, I noticed this mostly in like rifle qualifications and stuff, but more often than not, if you do enough training, if you do enough shooting, you end up on a hard surface of some kind. Now, if you're on a hard surface of some kind, what ends up happening a lot, and we're talking like wood, concrete, military, a lot of military ranges have like concrete pads that you shoot on and stuff, and a lot of local ranges have concrete pads that you shoot on, or wooden tables like this one that are usually not as like dried and whatnot as this, because they're, you know, covered by an overhang of some kind. And the problem that I find with a lot of magazines like this, or if we're looking at Lancers, right, which are pretty rounded on the bottoms, you're pretty much on just the corner of the floor plate, and just getting into a position, either I'm in the prone or whatever, right? Just trying to get into a position and setting the magazine on that surface makes life just a little bit more difficult, because I can feel the gun trying to roll around. So instead of using that to essentially scrape into a position and get nice and solid while I get behind the rest of the rifle, I'm essentially just totally dependent on it just kind of being a point of contact that isn't as secure, kind of depending on the appendages to keeping the rifle where it needs to be. Now, and again, it doesn't seem like much, but additionally, when the gun starts to recoil a little bit, you feel the gun rolling about a little, and sometimes it'll disturb a little bit of that sight picture depending on what it is, and it forces you to roll the gun back up into place or reset your shoulders or whatever the fuck, right? Again, it is really, really subtle, and it's not a huge deal in any sense of the word, but having a rubberized surface that when you set it on a hard surface essentially flattens everything out, because instead of having just a corner to set the magazine on, you have a whole flat surface to set on that hard surface, whatever it is. And because it's rubberized, it does that gripping stuff for you. And as the gun starts to recoil and stuff, it doesn't try to roll around. You can see, you know, I'm essentially doing this here, and the gun isn't really going anyplace. You know, again, essentially from here, if I'm doing the same thing, it'll slip around. It's pretty obvious, right? Now, one of the reasons why I really like GI magazines, especially like brand new ones, is because the way that the floor plates are designed and how the magazine body essentially holds in the floor plate, it has some sharp and angular surfaces, which really dials back a lot of the issues that I have with some of the plastic mags, to where that same movement isn't really there because it's essentially stabbing into that surface. And it shows more on wood, but it offers enough resistance on like concrete or street to not move the gun around a bit. On asphalt or concrete, the plastic mags still slide around. However, there's one more really subtle and rather unique benefit that I really do like, that a lot of guys have been using for a long time, that really does help out with this a lot. And that goes for essentially getting a good angle on something. Like, let's say that you set up in a position, right, and you're proned out and you're trying to hit something fairly far away, but because of just how the terrain is, that target, whatever it is angled a little bit high to the point where you're craning your neck really hard, and you have all that tension in here, and it pulls some of your focus away from the shooting part. What you can do with a Ranger plate, regardless to whether or not it's a polymer mag or an aluminum mag or whatever, is simply throw that underneath that Ranger plate, and when you set that guy into place, right, essentially what you give yourself is just a little bit more elevation. Now, obviously, you saw on a flatter, harder surface, there is a little bit of sliding involved, yes. But there's less craning in the neck, you get a little bit more elevation, and you can dial into that greater angle without putting so much tension on your shoulders. And this is a rather old technique that's been in use for a long time, but it makes way more sense with a Ranger plate on your magazine, because there isn't as much slipping as there would be if it's either a regular GI magazine, like so, right? Because regardless to whether or not it's a little bit sharper on the body, you can see it slipping on the magazine itself, or even worse, you know, just a rounded bottom magazine, which will try to slip all day on this thing. Obviously you see that it scales up. So whether or not there is a little bit of slipping that you'll have to deal with as far as a hard surface is concerned, but on like dirt or whatever, it's great to use for a flatter surface, or I'm sorry, for a softer surface like dirt and gravel and whatnot. and it still provides you that angle. And because the Ranger Plate is made out of the material that it is, it makes life quite a bit easier in that regard. Now, again, I've used these things for years, fired bajillions of rounds through magazines that had them, because over time, obviously, I picked up more of them. I've ordered these magazines from Brownells and a bunch of GI floor plates, which in my opinion, the floor plate replacement is far more hardy than a GI floor plate, mostly because over time, where is that thing? Over time, you'll start to see shit like this, because there's just a lot of pressure that's put on this thing, and when it drops, it falls straight on that one corner of the magazine. The spring's constantly pushing pressure against it, and the first place that it finds a little bit of a give in the metal, it's going to start just peeling that away, right? So it's far more secure, in my opinion, to have one of these guys on, because, and you guys can Google this really easily, it's just how this floor plate is designed, how it sits into the magazine body itself, and there's also a little locking tab on here. The body of the floor plate itself is far more robust, and there aren't really any places that spring tension can essentially force the thing apart. And you can even see that in the exact place where you saw that GI magazine floor plate starting to come apart, it's actually quite a bit more beefed up in that area than pretty much anywhere else to essentially prevent that. So that's nice, and it really is. Now, there are a couple of drawbacks to this. Over time, because it's a rubberized part and because it's exposed to elements and probably gun oil and stuff like that, they do expire like any other gun guide part, and you see that here, right? This is like a 6-year-old magazine on a 6-year-old floor plate, right? And again, that's a fantastic service life for a part that essentially has, and you guys know this, has had the absolute crap kicked out of it. But once you start to see this separate apart, you can essentially see how the floor plates designed for Magpul magazines are designed to where essentially this piece is probably just kind of glued on to this floor plate here. Now, what happens when this starts to peel apart? You can essentially just kind of rip it off there, and now you have a standard floor plate. So even if that happens, you're not really compromising the integrity of the magazine. It's just this guy finally wore out, and you can actually see where that guy hooks up, right? That one tab feeds into that, and the rest of it's probably glued on. So, you know, it is what it is. But when they wear out, it's not like it kills your magazine, right? You don't have to worry about it flying apart or anything like that. The only thing that you do really have to kind of be conscious of is that this button right here is a little more exposed than this one. Now, is that a problem? No, not really, because if you load your magazines, there's going to be a lot of tension on that button that releases the floor plate, and when you drop them, it's not like really anything is directly pushing on it, and even if it does, this has a long way to go before it comes off. You'll probably notice it in your training and all that, and if you're in a live fight, I don't think it'll actually matter if you drop it and the spring flies out. So, you know, it is what it is. There's one more drawback to it, and it's what keeps me running around with regular floor plate magazines somewhere on my kit, depending on whatever it is that I'm doing, and I'll go ahead and show that to you guys now. Okay, so as you can see here, we got the rifle laying on the ground, and if you can or cannot see, we have a Type 3 stoppage on the thing, right? So in our Rifle 2 class, we start dealing with some problem solving and how to compensate for Murphy coming to fuck up your day, essentially. Now, we start going into a lot of one-handed stuff because if the lights are still on and you're hurt, that shouldn't matter, right? And chances are, if you're shot, it's one of your extremities, just statistically speaking, right? So whether or not it's rifle or pistol, we go into one-handed manipulations, and that includes stoppages. So if that's the case, well, how do we do this with one hand? Well, generally how we end up teaching this is you roll the gun over to this side, right? And the idea generally is to get a foot planted behind the stock here so that it can't go anyplace. And if, the terrain dictates exactly what it is that you're trying to do. Let's say that you still have that one hand, but, you got mud or whatever underneath the gun. You end up propping that up into essentially the crook of, or rather the joint between your foot and your shin. So again, there's a little bit of air there so that your ambi charging handles or whatever don't essentially hinder your progress, and so you don't just shove stuff into your action. But then what we do is we take that one hand, we'll use the floor plate of a magazine to kick that charging handle open, push as far back on it as we can possibly get, and then once we get as far back as we possibly can, we essentially press on the ping pong paddle and lock the gun to the rear. You can see how far back the charging handle is, and then from there, you can essentially, depending on, whether or not you have a right-handed or ambi setup or what have you, you can then essentially just kind of start to pull the magazine out and all that stuff. And once you essentially got it in a position to where you can start to rip it out, right? We can finish the job and then gas the gun up and go from there. Well, as far as that's concerned, with a regular flat floor plate, that's pretty easy, right? However, with a Ranger plate on the installed rather on your magazine, you run into a couple of issues. Now, here's the thing. When we go in to do this same technique with a Ranger plate on the magazine, these, because of how they're made, or the material that they're made out of rather, is collapsible. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that this isn't doable, like it's impossible to do or anything like that, but what I will say is that it is much harder to do, especially under any reasonable amount of stress, when it collapses like that, okay? Now, can it be done? Yes. And is it a deal-breaking thing? Absolutely not. However, it is something still to consider, and if your mind ain't 110% on the game at that exact moment, you can fuck yourself up pretty hard, right? So, realistically speaking, I mean, is it a game breaker for me? Personally, no. But when I'm planning for, Murphy to show up and screw my day up, as far as how my kit is set up and everything else, I generally like running magazines with Ranger plates in them. Obviously, you guys see me run both without much of an issue. But if I'm doing something that I consider mildly serious, right, whether or not it's on a plate carrier or a belt or whatever, right, the magazines I'll reach for in a most likely case are up front, and I have at least one standard floor plate magazine as far back as possible. So if I have to deal with some shit like that, I know probably, maybe, this is available for that. And if not, it can still be done. Makes sense? So really, that's the only drawback that I have. Now let's be honest here. Is this something that you absolutely have to have in your kit? No, it's not. Is it something that is going to make or break whether or not, you do well? No, absolutely not. In no way possible is that anywhere near a logical thing to say. And by the way, as far as just compatibility with pouches and stuff, some magazine pouches, especially like fold-over flaps and stuff, and that's mostly a concern for like military guys and some police departments, you might have a compatibility issue depending on the type of flap design that you have. Most regular dually pouches with the flaps that come over them will accept a magazine with a Ranger plate in it, but if you stack them up, two, it won't. Or it will, and you'll barely have any Velcro left at all. So that kind of defeats the purpose because it won't actually retain anything. So, but is it something that's going to make or break whether or not you do well? No, it's absolutely not. Are there a couple of things to consider? Possible drawbacks, that kind of thing? Yeah, there are. However, the little itty bitty things as far as quality of life that it does for you far outweigh any of that. You know, a 6-year-old magazine with a 6-year-old floor plate that you can easily rip off and have a standard floor plate after. I don't even know where that thing is right now. Oh, here it is. You know, having this be the end result as to whether or not that Ranger Plate lives is not a huge drawback to me. You know, they're fairly cheap. It's a few bucks for like a set of 3. You know, if you know, it's one of those deals to where if you are considering it, I would just go ahead and drop a couple of bucks on it and figure out how it works for you, really. So, what do you think? Have you used them before? Have you used them before and don't like them? I want to know those opinions in the comments below. Give me something to consider that I haven't before, as far as your experience. Have you used them before and you love them? You know, it is what it is. I mean, I 100% understand guys that aren't willing to outfit every single one of their magazines with a Ranger Plate. I totally get it. It's one of those things where it's like, it doesn't do a fuck ton for you. It just makes life a little bit easier, so it's not like a game-changing thing. So I understand guys that aren't even really willing to fuck with them, honestly. But, you know, if let me know if, because of this video, you're now starting to consider them, right? I know that there are competitor products with it, or against it, rather. But just over time, I personally just like them more than the other competitors, mostly because of how they end up giving you a little bit more of a purchase on your hand. They're soft, so that they help deal with all terrain types. It makes it easier to do that magazine stacking technique. It makes a shitload of sense to me, and I'll continue to use them in one capacity or another for like ever. So that's all I got, guys. What do you guys think about this video? And here's another thing. If you want to get training with us, you can absolutely go ahead and check out our website. We have class listings, and we travel friggin' all over. So chances are we'll be in an area near you. If you want to support us through Patreon, that would be fantastic. I've said on this channel 1,000 times that it goes a lot farther than you realize, because it does. And because we use the vast majority of that money to essentially train soldiers for nothing, right? We fly them in, we feed them, we board them, we feed them ammo, and we give them gear to use for classes. So, you know, if you want to throw anything towards that, that's 110% up to you. Also, if you want to leverage this in your favor and use it for something, if you sign up for $35 a month, you can train with us for an unlimited number of classes for however long that you're signed up to the $35 a month program. And if you do some math and check that against what we list for a class, which is $200, it's easy to see that that system is really easy to abuse, and that's really what it was designed for. You know, guys that come out and beat the hell out of themselves and want to train are people that we really want to accommodate, because we recognize how expensive this shit really is. So, you know, consider that, and if not, that's fine. You know, simply clicking on the video and watching it is enough for us. It's not a big deal. So, if you want to join the discussion group on Facebook, you can absolutely do that. I would personally suggest it, mostly because there's a lot of good information that flows on there, and there's a lot of good people on that page. We're bringing in more members every day. I have a number of admins that bring in people every day, and I approve a bunch of different members every day. So you can go out there, ask me a question, or ask a group a question, and, you know, or just have a good time. So, but end of the day, that's all I got, guys. And remember, a regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Be easy.